This video is on Unit 4, Level 3.3a, Completing the Square Notes. So if you have a quadratic equation, and it's in this format, a squared plus 2ab plus b squared, you can factor that by a plus b in parentheses squared. Or, if this is a minus, you would have a minus here. So first let's go over what does it look like to complete the square. So we're going to find the value that completes the square and then rewrite as a perfect square. So x squared plus 12x plus blank. What would go here? First, we need to take our b. Remember, this is our a, this is our b, and this is our c. We take our b, which is 12, and we divide it by 2, and we get 6. This is also what we're going to use whenever we write our perfect square. So once we have our 6, we're going to square it to find our c. 6 squared is 36. So we put 36 right here. So our answer is x squared plus 12x plus 36. And then writing it as perfect square would be x plus 6 squared. So let's turn the page over and let's practice one of the problems. Let's do one with a negative, say like number 3. We have z squared minus 8z plus, what is that? This is our a, this is our b. We want to know what our b is. So let's rewrite, well, let's take our b, negative 8. So we know that whenever we rewrite it as a perfect square, it's going to be z minus something squared. 8 divided by 2 is 4. So I'm going to put that right here. What goes here would be that number squared. 4 times 4 is 16. So that's just the basic concept of what it means to complete the square and rewrite it as a perfect square. So let's look back on the other side, and let's learn how to solve an equation by completing the square. So to solve a quadratic equation by completing the square, first you need to transform the equation so that the constant term c is alone on the right side. So let's look at our first example. X squared minus 10x minus 39 equals 0. We are going to move our c, this is my c, to the right. So at the minus 39, I add 39 to both sides. This cancels out, and I get equals 39. My next step is, if you have a coefficient for a number here besides 1, then you're going to divide the whole thing by a. We don't for this, so we're just going to kind of skip that step. We'll go and do this next example after this to show you how to do that. So now we need to add b divided by 2 squared to both sides. So let's figure out, our b is negative 10. Negative 10 divided by 2 is negative 5. So we're going to write it down here in the line below this, x minus 5 squared. 5 squared, or negative 5 squared, either one, is 25. If I add 25 to one side to keep my equation equal and balanced, I need to add 25 to the other side. 39 plus 25 is 64. It says factor left side. I just kind of do it both at the same time. But x minus 5 squared is this trinomial factored. Now I can take the square root of both sides. That would be step number 5. Take the square root of both sides. Remember that x plus q squared equals r is equivalent to x plus q equals plus or minus the square root of r. Let me skip that over a little bit for you so you can see that. So let's go back here. So the square root of x minus 5 squared is x minus 5. The square root of 64 is plus or minus 8. So now we can solve. So either x minus 5 equals 8 or x minus 5 equals negative 8. Solve, add 5 to both sides, and I get x equals 13. When I add 5 to both sides here, I get x equals negative 3. So my solution set is 13 and negative 3. So if we have an example where a does not equal 1, say in this one. So I'm going to first do my first step, move c to the right. So I have 7x squared minus 14x equals 56. Now, every one of these numbers is divisible by 7. We gave you a nice good example where all the numbers are going to be even. We won't have any fractions. So 7 divided by 7 is 1. Negative 14 divided by 7 is negative 2. And 56 divided by 7 is 8. So our next step is to find b, which is negative 2, divided by 2, which is negative 1, I'm going to write that here, and then I'm going to square it. B divided by 2 squared. Negative 1 squared is a positive 1. So I'm going to add 1 here to complete the square. So I have to add it to the right side to balance my equation. So I'm going to get x minus 1 squared equals 9. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides. And I get x minus 1 equals plus or minus 3. Solve for x minus 1 equals 3, and x minus 1 equals a negative 3. Here, x will equal to 4, and then x will equal to negative 2. Solution set of 4 and negative 2. So let's turn the page back over and work a couple of the problems to make sure we understand how to do it. So that 5 through 10 are the example problems that go with this section. So if we do number 5, my first step is to move my 39 over, and I get p squared plus 16p equals negative 39. My a is 1, so I don't have to divide. I'm going to go ahead and write my factored thing p plus something squared. So 16 divided by 2 is 8. I'm going to write that here. 8 squared is 64. If I add 64 to this side, I have to add 64 to that side. So I'm going to have p plus 8 squared equals negative 39 and a positive 64 will give me 25. Hopefully this number will be a perfect square, or you're going to end up with a number of the radical, but I think all the problems we gave you are perfect squares. We take the square root of both sides, and I have p plus 8 equals plus or minus 25. So now let's solve. See what our solutions are. Either p plus 8 will equal to a positive, see what I did? Sometimes I forget. You always have to take the square root of it. Square root of 25 is not 25. It is plus or minus 5. So p plus 8 is equal to a positive 5, or p plus 8 equals a negative 5. Subtract 8 from both sides. P is either equal to negative 3, or when you subtract 8 over here, p is equal to negative 13. So my solution to that is negative 3, negative 13. It does not matter the order that you write these answers in. So let's do one with a coefficient. Say number 9. Let's go ahead and move my 89, my c, over to the right. And I get 10n squared minus 20n equals negative 9, and a positive 89 is going to give me a positive 80. My a is 10, so I need to divide each term by 10. N squared minus 2n is going to equal to 8. So now I need to complete the square. I'm going to go ahead and write what my factored form is going to be. So I take negative 2 divided by 2, I get negative 1. Negative 1 squared is positive 1. I have to add it to both sides. So n minus 1 squared equals 9. When I take the square root of that, I'm going to get n minus 1 equals a plus or minus. Remember to take the square root of 9. That would be 3. So either n minus 1 equals a positive 3, or n minus 1 equals a negative 3. Add 1 to both sides, and n equals 4. Or, when I add 1 to both sides here, I get n equals a negative 2. So my solution set is negative 2, 4. Let's turn it back over and learn about how to identify the vertex of a quadratic by completing the square. So we need to take the quadratic equation in the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 and turn it into this form, a times x minus h squared plus k equals 0 by completing the square. So remember, our vertex is hk. Let's write that down. Vertex is HK. So our first step for this example, we're going to factor A, which is 1, out of my first two terms. So I'm just going to write the 1 here, even though we don't really need to do that. I'm going to group together x squared plus 2x, and then I still have minus 1. So my next step is I'm going to add b divided by 2 squared inside the parentheses, and then subtract it from c over here. So let's see what that looks. You know, I like to write my factored form down here. So 2 divided by 2 is a positive 1. 1 squared is 1. If I add 1 here, I have to subtract it from here because they're on the same side of the equation. I don't want to add any value, and so basically I'm adding plus 1 and negative 1, which is 0. It's just in a different form. So when I factor it, x plus 1 squared, negative 1 gives me negative 2. So my vertex is going to be negative 1, negative 2. Because remember, our basic form is x minus h. So I'm going to have this plus, that means that's a negative 1. Minus a negative 1 gives you a positive. Now, what do we do if a is not 1? So let's look at this next example. Y equals 3x squared plus 30x plus 74. Step number 1, we're going to factor a out of the first two terms. So out of 3x squared plus 30x, I can factor 3 out there. So 3 times x squared, because I want this a to be 1, plus 10x. 3 times 10x is 30x. And then just keep the 74 right here, plus 74. So now I need to complete the square. B is 10. B divided by 2 is 5. So I've still got my 3 here, plus 5 squared. 5 squared is 25. Now this is the tricky part. Remember, I have this 3 outside of parentheses. 3 times 25 is 75. So I'm basically adding 75 right here. So it means I have to subtract 75 here. So when I factor that, I get 3 times x plus 5 squared minus 1, because 74 minus 75 is negative 1. So my vertex is going to be negative 5, negative 1, since this is a plus. Let's look at a problem on the back. Do we want to do one with a coefficient? You probably might not appreciate that if we do that. So let's look at number 14. Y equals, so I'm going to group together my first two terms. I'm going to take out, divide both by my a. So I'm going to take out my 4. I get x squared minus 10x. I'm going to leave a space here for me to complete the square, and then I've got plus 106. So let's go ahead and write our factored form. It's going to be x minus something squared. So negative 10 divided by 2 is a negative 5. Negative 5 squared is a plus 25. I need to scoot this over so you can see it better. Now if I add 4 times 25, that's 100. If I add it here, I have to subtract it here. So 106 minus 100 is going to give me a positive 6. So my vertex is going to be positive 5, positive 6. That's a negative right there. So good luck. Try to do all the problems that we did not work together on the video and show it to your teacher when you're done. Thank you.